Welcome to your second lecture in Honors Biology. In this lecture, we are going to be talking about the characteristics of life. What makes something alive versus something that is considered to be inanimate? There are several different characteristics in this. What I'm going to ask you to do after each characteristic, I want you to leave a gap in your notes because we're going to go back and add stuff in. I'm not going to do my entire lecture in this because it would last way more than the 20 minutes that I want it to last. So make sure you leave some space in between each of the characteristics so we can go back and add stuff as we go through this in class. In order to be considered alive, the first thing you have to have is you must be made of cells. Now, flashback to previous sciences, and hopefully you remember that cells are the smallest unit of a living thing or a living organism. Cells are also self-contained. They have cell membranes, they have cell walls that keep them to themselves, and then they have transport mechanisms to get things across their borders. Cells can also grow and respond to its environment, meaning that you can affect how cells respond. If we have a cut, then our cells respond to the cut by creating more cells in order to replace the ones that got beat up. Cells can also reproduce, and we'll talk about that this year. Last thing I want you to know about cells, they can be extremely complex and highly organized. Some cells, they're just a teeny tiny little cell, and that's what makes up the organism. However, just because it's one cell doesn't mean that it is a very simple organism. They can be very, very complex, and they're also highly organized, or otherwise nothing would happen in the cell. We'll add more stuff to this one once you get into class, so make sure you leave some space so that I can add more. The second thing that makes you alive is that you can reproduce. There's two types of reproduction that we can talk about. The first one is asexual reproduction. The second one that we're going to talk about is sexual reproduction, hence how you got here. We'll go into more detail with this in class as well, so make sure you leave space after them. The third thing that makes you alive is you have a universal genetic code. And this means DNA. DNA is what determines the inherited traits of an organism. We'll go into this a little bit more detail, and I'll have some pictures for you for that as well. The fourth thing, we're on number 4. You can grow and develop. This is usually done within a cycle. Just think of the cycle, how a caterpillar can go into a butterfly. Think of a cycle in that tense where you're born, you have your adolescent where you grow, you become an adult, and then you kind of sometimes have your decline periods when you eventually round back around and you end up dying. We always go in a cycle, and we'll talk a little bit more about that because different organisms will grow and develop a different way. Your fifth thing needs materials and energy. In order for a cell to live, it needs certain things in order to do so. Just like we need glucose. We have to have glucose in order to make the energy that gets us from first block to second block, or from home to, soccer practice. We got to have the energy to keep ourselves moving. Animals and plants get their energy sometimes in different ways. A lot of plants can get this through photosynthesis. Humans get a lot of their energy from cellular respiration. And we'll talk about those a little bit more in class. We'll spend a lot of time on photosynthesis and cellular respiration within this semester. Number 6. Can respond to the environment. So if I put my hand on top of a hot stove, my body is going to tell me to take it off. My body is going to make me take it off. My cells can respond to that heat in order to keep me safe. So we can respond to our environment. There's 2 different stimuli that you can talk about this, and we'll talk about them in class. You have external stimuli, and then you have internal stimuli. And we'll talk about those when you get into class. Number 7, you have must maintain an internal balance. And we call this, and this will be one of your big words, homeostasis. How we as human beings maintain the balance that keeps us us. How do we regulate our body temperature? How do we regulate our glucose levels? How do we regulate our serotonin and things like that? How do we regulate our bodies in order to function as best as we can? Number 8, and your last one, is that you can evolve over time. Now, for this one, the thing you have to remember is we don't just stay stagnant as a species, as anything on this planet that is considered to be living. We have to constantly adapt to our environment. And so that is termed evolution. And we'll spend a lot of time with evolution on second semester. And we'll talk about the past theories and what is going on in the field of study right now. If something did not evolve, though, it would not be left on this earth. You've got to be able to change with the environment around you. Now, the last thing I want to go through within this is branches of bio. There's a lot of different branches of bio. It's going to start from way out there, and we're going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So we're going to talk big picture and then take it down to the smallest of the small levels. We will define these in class as we talk about them, but go ahead and write them down. Make sure you leave space, and we'll come in and fill in what you need to. First level, or first branch, is called the biosphere. The biosphere then goes down into the ecosystem. The ecosystem then goes down into community. Community then goes down into population. Population, you can break it down into organism. Organism goes into group of cells. Cells then goes down into individual cells. And last but not least, cells you can break down into molecules. Now we will talk about each one of these as we go through lecture when I see you in class.